let me tell you a story about that, actually. Canandaigua was one of the first, at the Poulin RIT Institute, was one of the first times I worked, was the first time I worked with iSECURE. And so the way they structured the event is there was a speaker, and then a chef would get up and prepare a course, and then we'd eat that while the next speaker got up, and it went on like that. So the first speaker was Nir Zook, right? He's the founder of Palo Alto. And it was funny because Nir gets up there, and the first thing he says is, "Who here has a firewall?" And everybody raises their hand. He goes, "Firewall is shit." He goes, "Who here has IDS?" IDS. Everybody raises their hand. He goes, "IDS is shit." And then he went on to talk about how application firewalls are the future. So he gets off stage, and I was scratching my head, and I go, "Nir, you were employee number 6 at Checkpoint, a firewall company. You were the founder of iSECURE, an IPS company. How long before you go, who here has application firewall? Application firewall is shit." To which he just walked away and shook his head, because he's not a very jovial guy. So that's what I remember from that particular conference, by the way. So today I want to tell you a little story. So anybody here see the new Quentin Tarantino film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood? None of you, huh? Oh, there you go. How about Pulp Fiction? All right. So we got some Pulp Fiction bits. So I figured that I'm going to sort of take a Tarantino-esque approach to this, because nobody wants me to get up here and talk about that side. That's not why you're here. You're here to hear about cybersecurity, and you're here to be entertained, let's be honest, right? So I figured I'd sort of take the Pulp Fiction approach a little bit and tell you a few stories. And before I do, not that I want to bloviate about myself here, but, and Robert just sort of mentioned a lot of the things that I've done, but throughout my career, by the way, I've been a programmer, I've been a CISO, I've been in a 15-person company that I started, I've been in a 450,000-person company called IBM, I've been in the private sector, I've been in the public sector, I've been all over the place. But every time I talk to people in cybersecurity, one of the things that comes up is you can't measure cybersecurity, right? Anybody here know Josh Corman? He's on the speaking circuit quite a bit. He does anti-cavalry and a few other things, right? So I actually had a pretty interesting debate with him. And he says that you can't measure cybersecurity because as soon as you start to measure what constitutes a good cyber program, the bad guys will change their tactics just to thwart your measurements, right? So we have debates about that, and so I decided to join a company that measures things, and that's what we do at BitSight. So that's kind of a spoiler for where we go from there. But before we go into that, let me just talk a little bit about some seemingly random stories, again, sort of Tarantino-esque. Does anybody remember the Target hack? Everybody remembers Target, right? So you remember how it happened, right? So I love this little icon, by the way. Gee, that's a good hacker. You got it. It's a weird mess. So you remember what happened, right? Is that it was an HVAC company, third-party hack, and I'm not going to go into the whole thing because we all know what happened at that point. I find it interesting, by the way, that to this day, people still persist in talking about the fact that they used the credentials from the HVAC company to break into an HVAC system, which gave them access to the data, which is not, it's never been corroborated. In fact, I know some people who did some of the incident response, and that is not how it happened, by the way. So any of you still think that it was an HVAC system? An HVAC system? No? Now that I said that, you're not going to be able to answer. All right. So it's interesting because I hear that all the time. That's not exactly how it happened. So nice little bill. Let's move on from this book here. So, and then everything gets stolen, and to what Chip said, it all goes to Russia, right? So here's another one that you may never heard of. Does anybody here know about the South Korea communications hack? No? Okay, so it didn't really make a lot of news here in the US. But here's what happened, right? So there's this company called South Korean Communication. They run some websites, and obviously in South Korea. And they had a really good security program. Their program was amazing, right? So they had everything, including a great patching system. So this group of hackers wanted to breach them, but they couldn't break into the front door. They couldn't phish them, or they tried all kinds of things. They couldn't get into them. But what they found out was that SKCom actually, because they had such a good patching system, they also had a utility to do this patching, right? So they actually could zip files up and send it. So what ended up happening is that these hackers broke into the company that provided that utility, because they didn't have great security, they Trojan that so it would only take effect, it would only activate once it got onto SKCOM's site. Have them there. Once it got onto SKCOM's site, and so South Korea Communication downloaded that updated version of their software and pushed it out to all their systems quite efficiently. So effectively, the third party ended up compromising all of their internal systems because they had such a good patching program. So, anybody feel good about their patching program now? Another thing that's kind of interesting, I spent quite a bit of time in the IoT space, right? So things like medical device manufacturers, connected cars are always fun, because the thing that's interesting is when you start talking to car manufacturers, think back to Henry Ford, basically he just got a bunch of metal, pounded it out, had probably some wheels manufactured and put together, probably had his hand in a lot of that stuff. But when you go and talk to GM, Ford, and Toyota, and even Tesla, right, US made car, what they always say is, we don't actually manufacture cars anymore. What we do is we build them. We actually assemble them from parts. So everything you see on a car nowadays, the engine itself, body panels, the wheels, all the electronics that go in it, come from everywhere else. So when you press on the brakes, you're basically pressing on something that was made by Bosch or Denso. Different parts of it may come from Continental, they might come from NXP, NVIDIA. When you look at the bill of materials for a car nowadays, there are at least 3,000 different manufacturers that have contributed to making that car. And so the manufacturers themselves are just taking all those parts from third parties, cramming them together, and hoping it doesn't crash. So you guys heard about the G-Hack, right? So you know how that happened is the telematics unit was actually made by, who the hell made that? Anybody remember?
It was CAN bus, but I don't know what.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It's not Nokia. It's right on the tip of my tongue. The Harman, that's it. So in fact, Harman makes probably about 30% of all vehicles on the road today are controlled by a Harman entertainment system, infotainment system in there. And so that's how the hackers got in. They basically found that the thing was listening on port 6667 on the Sprint network with no controls on it. And so you could actually just go get a Sprint phone, figure out which IP addresses were on it, and then just scan all those addresses, and you would find Jeeps and Cadillacs and anything else that used them. So, two things that are a result of this. Number one is that it's all about the supply chain nowadays, right? Almost anything you have is about the supply chain. In your pocket, your phone, your car, anything you can think of. And the supply chain manufacturers are not necessarily focused on security, even though the car manufacturers are, right? So something to think about whenever you're on that new IoT thing. And by the way, since I spend a fair amount of time in IoT, I just sort of an observation, by the way. Anybody, well, I talked about this last time, so I'll talk about it again. Why not? Anybody here watch survival shows? Dual Survival, Survivor Man, Naked Infrared, come on, you know you do. So one of the reasons I love those shows so much is because we are so far evolved from actually knowing how to make fire, get water, get food, get shelter, all of that stuff, right? So it's kind of interesting to me. And a lot of people have said that it's carbon or fossil fuel that sort of created the society we live in right now. If carbon or fossil fuel went away right now, we wouldn't be able to heat our homes. We wouldn't be able to drive to work. We wouldn't be able to power manufacturing plants to make all the shiny toys that we have, right? So that's interesting, and I agree with that. But you know what? We're actually even one step above that now. Think about this. If data went away, not even electricity, if just data went away, we would be screwed, right? You couldn't get to work anymore. Because a lot of the things that get us to work, cars are starting to rely so much on data now that eventually they're not going to be able to function without data. At some point in the near future, good night. At some point, what did I just say? Electricity? Some point in the near future, cars are going to be required to be self-driving to some extent. So what's the worst part about driving? Where does everything get going? Traffic, but intersect and merge points, right? If we could just get people to merge properly, we'd all be good, right? All right, so I know that some of you are bad mergers in there. I'm not going to point you out. So the trick is you stay at speed, you pick the bumper of somebody you want to merge in behind, and then you go behind them, right? Isn't that the way you're supposed to merge for the most part? Don't stop at the top of the ramps. Don't get distracted by crap, so there's all kinds of things. But we're human, we're going to do that anyway. So at some point, the thesis is that as we go to self-driving, what's going to end up happening is that because people are like, you're not going to take the steering wheel out of my cold dead hands, right? People want that. Why is this doing this? Nah, who cares? We'll just leave it there. And so what the thesis is that in order to cooperate, because you have cars that aren't self-driving, then you're going to have eventually cars that are all self-driving. So somewhere in that middle is where all the assholes in the technology get together, right? That's sort of how And so I think that what will end up happening is that the cars will take over mandatory merge points because that's where we have problems, right? So everything will be nice and smooth. But now you think about that. If data goes away, we're not going to be able to drive to work. You get on the commuter rail now, or whatever type of train you have here, that's often controlled by some sort of GPS, and the tracks are now tracking where the trains are at any point, so they know when to switch people on and off. A lot of times your ticket to get on the train or get off the train is on your phone, which is data-based, right? So there's a lot of things that we're doing that are all about data. Our food production, our food delivery is going to be based upon data. So if data goes away at some point, we're all screwed, right? So we're beyond electricity, we're going beyond carbon or fossil fuel, beyond electricity, and we're all the way up to data. So data powers everything nowadays, and it's going to get worse. Depending on how you consider worse. So another thing that's kind of interesting, again, sort of a side story, sticking with the IoT thing, smart meters. Anybody here have a smart meter in their house? No? Right, you do, yeah. Some people do. You may not notice it. It doesn't look like this, by the way. This is, I don't know if this is a smart meter. I don't think so. But smart meters are kind of interesting because they capture a lot of data. Anybody consider your smart meter usage to be sensitive data? Yeah, so a couple of you, right? So the more paranoid, yeah. So those of you who have Faraday bags in your pocket, you keep your phone in there. You are crazy. You're super paranoid. By the way, privacy is dead. Give up on it. Just to be provocative, I love watching it. About 30% of you are like, no. So, interestingly, smart meters, there were some researchers who, we know things like, there's actually something you can put on your power main, like go to your main circuit cabinet, and there's this little thing you can stick on the wires, and it measures the power usage in there, and they can tell you things like, your air conditioner kicked on. They look at the cycle usage, et cetera, et cetera. So there's some metrics that they use to look at gross utilization of electricity to determine what you're using. Hey, your coffee pot kicked on, your air conditioner kicked on, whatever. But if you get access to the smart meter data, some researchers went out and they found that they could actually determine what you were watching on television just by monitoring the microburst of electricity in your smart meter. So that should scare you a little bit. The point of that story, by the way, is that you do not need to have direct access to anything. You can actually get a lot of information through side channel access to data. Right? So now if I can just take your energy usage and figure out what you're watching on TV, imagine what else I can figure out, right? So think about this, right? Just sort of a side story. Anybody here have the adjustable bed that's connected to the internet? Do you know what I'm talking about? The one that you can raise up, the numbered bed, sleep number bed? So they connected to the internet now. And there was actually they had to lock down the privacy controls because what was happening is that spouses or partners are finding out that their significant other was having more activity in bed than normal. So you can find out all kinds of things. You can find out which TV you're watching. You can find out, not just by the way, that you were having in flagrante delicto in the afternoon, right? For those of you who said it was afternoon delight. So not only can you find that out, but you can probably find out who they were having it with if you get access to their car's data, because you can find out whose car is in your driveway. Or you can monitor cell phone usage. You could put up a little cell phone passive data gathering device, like a Pineapple or something like that, and look at what it's beeping out, right? Because cell phones, whenever they connect to Wi-Fi networks, they basically store that network by default. And they're going to beacon that name out so you can determine that it's Bob's, right? So, hey, Bob, not you, Bob, but other Bobs. Bob the generic Bob. What about Bob? What about Bob? So you can find out all kinds of, you can determine so much information by side channel data, is all I'm trying to say, right? And it can be anything from the purient to the sublime. It just depends on what you're looking for. In fact, another example is, Again, these are just random stories, but I'm going to tie it together something. You remember when the NSA it was a big thing that the NSA was storing our cell phone calls, and they said it's metadata, don't worry, right? So some researchers at University of something, hey, that was the name the University of something, I can't remember where it was, they did a research study to try to figure out how much you could find out from looking at the metadata. And they actually figured out they could determine what kind of medical conditions you had. They determined how well your finances were, whether you were in debt or not. They could find out all kinds of things about you personally, because if you look at the phone numbers and you trace them back to who you called, the frequency of the calls, et cetera, you can actually determine that you were calling a medical clinic, an oncology clinic, a herpes clinic, I don't know, whatever it is you got. So you could, are there such things, by the way? If anybody, don't say yes, right? So you can find out all kinds of things like side channel information, is all I'm trying to say. All right, so kind of interesting stuff to work. It's kind of interesting stuff to think about. All right, so let's step aside for a second. Let's talk about something else. Why in the hell do we still put our hand on a Bible when we go to court? Does anybody think that putting your hand on the Bible is going to stop anyone from lying? No? So, and I always think about it, right? But why do we still do that? It's like weird practice, right? So what if you're not Christian? What if you're atheist? Do you put your hand on a plate of spaghetti? I don't know. What's the atheist part? What if you're, you need to keep a Quran and a Bible and a Book of Mormon and let's see what else. Zoroastrians, right? Any Zoroastrians in the crowd? No? I don't even know what book you use. So there's all kinds of weird religions out there. So how do you do that? And C, a liar freely gives us oath. I mean, isn't that the whole conundrum, right? If I tell you that I lie, then am I lying when I tell you that I'm lying? In which case, it doesn't make any sense, right? So I think it's kind of a silly thing. So, but, what if you give me a stack of Bibles? Am I going to be any more truthful than that? Is that going to make me 3 times more truthful? Probably not. Does Bibles have magic qualities that I'm not aware of? I'm not entirely sure why we still do that. Anybody know, by the way, do you know if there's actually a valid reason? I've tried to find out if swearing an oath on the Bible has any validity in court, and why we still do that.
They actually don't make you do that anymore.
They don't? Some do. I know that there was in the UK, they had a big, there was a lawmaker who had a petition that he wanted to get rid of the whole Bible thing, and they decided to keep it. That was about 2-3 years ago. So they don't do it in U.S. courts anymore? But they do swear, they do make you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing about the truth.
You just put your hand up.
Yeah. So, okay, so let's get rid of the Bible. Let's take religion out of the question. Why the hell do we do that? I don't know. Oh, yes?
So they can get you with perjury if you find out you're full lie.
So, but isn't the whole point that if you get on a stand that you're going to be, I don't know. It just seems, so basically that's a contract. So this is now a contract. I swear to tell the truth, the whole truth. Why don't they just have you sign? So let's talk about signing for a second. What the hell does signing have to do with anything anymore? Anybody actually sign for their credit card statement now with chip inside? It's all electronic, right? How do you sign on your chip inside? Does anybody else sign like I do? I sign it backwards on purpose just because I want to see what happens.
I used to put CID on the back of my card, and somebody called me Mr. Saeed one day.
So what does CID stand for?
SEE space I.D.
Oh, CID. I see. See my ID. It was called like Criminal Investigative Division? I'm not sure. I don't know. Yeah, so we do a lot of weird things, right? So what does all this have to do with cybersecurity? Is the point, right? So I've just gone off and talked about a bunch of crazy crap, right? So anybody here run a third-party risk program? Hello. What the hell is going on with my slides? Okay, here we go. Took a while. So who here runs a third-party risk program? Anybody part of it? Okay, some of you are, some of you don't. Anybody here participate in third-party risk programs? So vendor risk management, right? So looking at vendors. So it all comes together a little bit, right? So in fact, Chip was talking about it a little bit. I think he mentioned vendors, and then I know there was a question from right where that light is shining in my eyes, up in the audience. Somebody asked about third-party vendors, right? Because now, everything that we do is basically outsourced to everything else. I talked about cars, I talked about, what else I talked about? The fact that HVAC vendor was part of the target breach, the fact that SK Communications used a third party and they were hacked, so then SK Communications got completely compromised, 35 million records. So third party risk programs, by the way. The way these things work now is we are looking at outsourcing all kinds of stuff. So cloud, IoT, mobile, we want it now, right? Nobody really takes the time to vet out vendors anymore. So what we're seeing is that, oh, for God's sakes. I don't know what's going on here. It might be my computer. Could be. So one of the things that we're seeing is that organizations now are so decentralized, right? So you've got facilities, human resources, who here uses Workday? Everybody, right? Or something similar to Workday. You've got hardware that's coming from everybody. You're outsourcing payroll processing, benefits, anything you can think of. This is what organizations look like right now. They're just completely insane. In fact, I've talked to some customers who have 22,000 vendors that they're tracking right now. So it's not just a few, it's a lot of vendors that people are tracking. And interestingly, 59% of organizations say that they've experienced a data breach as a result of third parties. Oh, by the way, just sideways comment, right? I know, and Chip mentioned this earlier too, right? It's not if, it's when. Anybody believe that? Anybody think it's a hyperbolic statement? So everybody gets hacked, but I always think that's put together as sort of a little bit of fear and uncertainty, because that presumes that the when, they're all going to be equal, right? So right now, in your organization, you're experiencing a when right now. It's because somebody clicks on a link and they got adware and spyware. Who cares, right? AdWords spyware, nobody gets it. But it's different than a $35 million data breach. So I hate that expression, if, when. It kind of implies that the when is going to be catastrophic, but when happens all the time. So can we just stop saying that? Everybody raise your hand and swear it off. Exactly. So this is what organizations look like. So here's how people usually handle looking at third parties. And you guys have all been part of this. I guarantee you, every one of you have been on the receiving end of a questionnaire. Have you guys have filled out a questionnaire for a third party saying, what does your security program look like? How do you encrypt data? What does your endpoint look like? Blah, 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 blah. I've seen, so there's a standard called SIG. Standard Information Gathering. Thank you. Yeah. So SIG version 1, the full questionnaire was 1,600 questions. Anybody think that's insane? Is that a thing? So they reduced it, by the way. Now they've revised it, and the full SIG is only 800 questions. So, I feel better. So the problem, though, there's a twofold problem with that. Number one is that you can't go and, let's say you got 1,000 vendors and you go and you evaluate them. Number one is that you can send them this, let's just say you can send them a SIG light, just 200 questions. So you send them a 200 question questionnaire and you ask them all. They've probably been asked by at least 50 other organizations to fill out the same thing. The problem is that they're not standard questionnaires, right? People don't just use SIG. They're always like, I gotta put my spank on it because my organization is different. So you get a questionnaire and a lot of stuff looks the same, but then 30% of it is different because the organization is a stealth. So now you've got to go try to figure out how to interpret what in the hell they're asking you and then answer it, right? So number one is that most questionnaires are not high fidelity responses. So people try to figure out, they try to figure out what they're asking in the first place, and then they answer it the best they can, but they only have a limited time. So they may or may not go to the IT person and say, hey, do we actually know if our Amazon Web Services is only restricted to the US? Do we know whether or not our data is encrypted in the EC2 instance that we use, and whether the encryption is by Amazon, or whether we have control of it? I mean, there's so many just esoteric questions, and the IT manager's like, I got 17,000 things to do today. Yes. And point them at Amazon's webpage, and let's move on past this. That's how people answer those questions. Anybody disagree with me? Anybody actually spend like 4 or 5 hours figuring out the EC2 question? No, we shouldn't. It's stupid. So that's how it works, right? And so now, on the other hand, I send out all this questions. I got 22,000 vendors. I only have 300. Just let's bring it down. So what ends up happening is that you can't take all this information and make sense of it. You're going to spend so much time analyzing this data and tracking it. And plus, by the way, it's a point in time, right? It happened once. You don't know what happens. It's just like a penetration test. It's a point in time. So at some point, because of all the cloud services and everything, what we're finding is that people just can't handle the questionnaire-based approaches, and so basically they have risk. So, questionnaires, supposedly people do on-site assessments. I don't see that happen a lot, but that gives you a little bit more ground truth, right? And sometimes they do pen tests. Anybody here actually have a vendor come back to you and say, hey, or a partner using you as a vendor, say, we want to do a pen test on your network? Anybody have that happen? A couple times? Yeah, it's usually in the contract or some sort of right to audit, right to pen test in there. People don't exercise it all the time, but they'll do it once in a while. You know, which is good. Actually, that's good, but again, it's a point in time. So anyway, you get the point that we got a bunch of third-party risk happening, right? So all these vendors who are creating this extended view of the organization, creating risk that you don't control. On the other hand, the controls that we have in order to try to assess and mitigate those risks are not very efficient, they're not scalable, and they're not high fidelity because people just lie, like swearing in the Bible, right? So, interestingly, we actually have all kinds of rating systems that we use in day-to-day life. You know, so financial side, we use things like Moody and Fitch and S&P Global, et cetera, et cetera. We have consumer credit, you know, so TransUnion, Equifax, you know, all of those things. Anybody here look at their credit score once a year? They're supposed to. Anybody here look at all 4 credit reporting agencies once a year? Look at you. 3. Great. Yeah, there's technically 4. I actually look at so TransUnion, Experian. Oh no, that's right. Am I missing one? There's one more. It's not a big one. Anybody know who it is off the top of your head? Experian, is that it?
No,
It's there. All right, I have to go. I actually have in my calendar, because I'm super organized, I actually have once a quarter, I look at mine and my wife's, and I rotate through, because you can look at one a year. So every quarter I look at one of them, and so then when the year comes around, I'm looking at it once a year. Because I'm super organized and I'm super paranoid. So, cat really like that. So we have all these things, and then you've got the ones which are sort of crowdsourced, which, you know, anybody here give a shit about Yelp? It's funny because I have lots of friends who actually have businesses on Yelp, and you'll have one person who actually gives you a really bad review because they have bad for some reason. And what Yelp does is if you don't buy their subscription as a business, they put the bad ratings at the top on purpose to sort of force you. If you buy the subscription, then they'll sort of back down by a date that they're at. What do you think about that for ratings fidelity?
That's predatory.
What's that?
It's predatory.
It is predatory for sure. So, from a cybersecurity perspective, we believe the same thing, right? So now I'm going to put on my hat here. So, interestingly, you can actually observe what's happening on a third party from the outside. Kind of an interesting perspective. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So I got time here. Good, too high 10 minutes, sorry. So we basically, what we do is we take this external observation, much like the smart meters, and we put it into a portal where you can actually see any given company on the planet. We can tell you how well their security programs is working. Now, I'm not saying we pen test everybody. I'm not saying we do a vulnerability scan. I'm not saying any of that stuff, right? But we actually pick up on external signal, and we can map it into security programs. So if you're looking for whether or not they have good encryption, we can tell you that by looking at their external observations. If they've been botnet infected, we can pick up on that. There's all kinds of different information that we pick up on. We've been doing it for 8 years, so we can actually give you an 8-year history on a particular company. So we can do that at scale for, you know, again, we have customers who are using 22,000. 22,000 vendors that we're actually helping them. So how do we do that? The first thing is we have 120 data sources that we use. So we'll do things. So anybody here know how Bitly makes money, by the way? Let's start there, because that's interesting. No? Bitly? All right, because when you click on, you know, so they're URL shortener, right? So when you click on a Bitly link, so somebody shortens the URL, sends it to you an email, so it's not this big long thing. You click on it, you end up at that site. What ends up happening is you go to Bitly's site, but it's transparent. They basically redirect you to the final URL, and they don't show you ads. They don't have the opportunity to show you ads. So instead, what they end up doing is they store off the source IP address, so usually the external firewall IP address. They store the destination URL where you're going, but they also capture the headers. So now they know the operating system and the browser version that went to them. So, and then they make their money by selling that data to people like us. So not that we use Bitly necessarily, but there's all kinds of places on the internet, for example, and this is just one example of where you can get data, where you can get that kind of information. Ad exchanges, exact same model. So when you see ad pop-ups on the side, one of the ways they make their money is they basically sell the source IP, destination URL, and all the header data to whoever wants to buy it. So as a consequence of that, you get this sort of pseudo-transparency through a firewall. So you can see endpoint systems, and you know that they've got, a company has, at least from a sampling perspective, that of all the requests that we've seen, 10% of them are on outdated operating systems or on Android version Marshmallow or whatever it is that you care about, right? So you can actually start determining what their patching cadence is through the firewall and looking at that kind of external data. You can also, we do open ports, we look at certificates, we look at, we have a botnet sinkhole infrastructure where we capture botnet infections, so we can actually see where that comes from. So we take all of that stuff, and we've just got this big-ass data lake, right, which we've been doing for 8 years. And then the second thing we do is we actually profile a company's external footprint. So, I think Chip said that he hates shadow IT, but I'm going to say shadow IT anyway. Chip, are you here? Chip's not here. Oh, darn it. I just wanted to make fun of him. Chip's awesome. We worked that idea together back in the day. So what we do is we take the IP addresses from the outside, and that's a complex process. It's not easy to do. Right? So think about a big company like IBM. There's so many entities, you have to map all those things out and figure out which IP address and domains belong to them. I won't go into it today, and I'm happy to talk to you later if you want more information. But basically what we do is now we've mapped the companies, we've got their IP addresses, we've got all these observations about things. Then we just merge all that stuff together. So now we can say, this company has had 200 botnet infections in the last year. They had an open ports grade of C because, we've seen open telnet, we've seen unauthenticated VNC, we see all kinds of crazy stuff. And we break all that stuff down into 23 risk factors, and then we calculate an overall security rating. The reason we do this is that we believe that you should be able to compare any two companies or any companies on the planet, regardless of size. So whether it's two people in a garage in a startup compared to IBM or two pharmaceutical companies of the same size, you should be able to look at their rating and go, hey, they both got a 640, so that's parity. Their programs are operating kind of similarly. So that's sort of our goal for doing that. And you can use it for a number of things. So one of them is you can look at yourself and find out how you're doing. Because if you think about it, it's actually a little bit of a business. People are starting to, well, actually, let me ask you a question. Anybody here have heard of Insight before I just get on stage? A few of you. Anybody here heard of the security ratings industry at large? So our competitors are Security Scorecard versus Recon. Those are the major two ones. Anybody heard of them? Anybody here get a report from one of your partners saying, hey, your score went down and show you Insight or Recon or scorecards? That happens to a lot of people, by the way. So what ends up happening is that you can actually come back and say, look, our security program is operating properly, and BitSight says that we have a 750, which is a really good score. It's based upon the consumer credit model, 250 to 900. So that's a really good score. And so that actually becomes a business driver. When you're competing for business in an RFP, you can say, we have proper security, we've got a 750. That actually is something that we're starting to see as differentiators now. So you can look at your own program, and you can also look at your third parties, right? So I'm not going to go too deep in that. We also are, for any given cyber insurance policy, there's a 50-50 chance that we actually were part of the data that went into the underwriting. We actually also rate critical national infrastructure, so we have a sovereign's rating, so you can look at different countries against each other, see how they're performing if you care about geopolitical risk. And then we do a lot of stuff with mergers and acquisitions. So if you're going to merge with a company or acquire a company, find out what you're getting. Example, Marriott Sheraton. Right, that was a bad calculus on Marriott's part. You guys know that, right? Sheraton had been pretty well compromised before they were acquired, and Marriott did not know that well. They may have known it. I don't know. I don't know the exact deal, but if they did know it, I hope they shaved a couple billion off of that particular contract. And so you can do all kinds of things, like you can create alerts based upon the fact, so you're monitoring a vendor, and all of a sudden that vendor drops. And now you can say, uh-oh, I better go. So again, now we're talking about not just doing point in time, you can actually alert based upon something bad happening that would escalate your risk. You can look at specific types of risk and map them to the type of organizational program. So you can say, hey, you guys have endpoint problems. What are you doing for your endpoint? How are you dealing with user awareness training? So you can actually have targeted conversations with customers based upon the observations. You can look at specific resources and find out, we care about these 4 web servers because that's where our data is being exposed, so let's watch those. So you don't have to watch the entire organization. You can prioritize your risk, you can reach out to the vendors and have a conversation through the platform and actually monitor their action plan and how well they're performing towards it. And, come on, are we too far away? There we go. And then looking at yourself, you can actually analyze yourself compared to your peers and show your board how well you're doing. We actually have customers which do not recommend, they actually get a bonus based upon their bid size and whether they improve. That's not the point of it, but some people do it, just so you say. I'm just saying, hey, we're back. So that beating that horse too much. I know that there's some people who think the security ratings industry is, the data is not accurate. So we went out and we did a study in 2016. We took all the organizations, all the entities in our inventory that had been breached, and we correlated them back to their rating and to the different risk factors that we break it out by. What we found is that if you take 700 as the baseline, 700 or above, as you decrement it by 100-point increments, you actually increase the likelihood of breach incrementally. So as you drop down by 100 points, they're X times more likely to be breached. We also know that if they had a botnet infection or they were using BitTorrent to share files, they were twice as likely to be breached, or if they had an open port grade that we considered being out. So that was interesting, and we said, we went and we presented that at a conference in 2016, and there's a company called Air Worldwide, who is a catastrophic modeling agency. They look at things like hurricanes and stuff, but also cyber. So they raised their hand and said, bullshit, we don't believe you. You're a vendor, you're trying to sell us stuff. And so we said, here's our data, or here's our platform. You go take your data and find out what you see. And they actually came up with pretty similar results. So independently verified, it's that the data is accurate. And you can use it to compare your own performance as well as your vendors. It's really what it boils down to. So let me finish up here. And so the Pulp Fiction wrap up, right, this always happens. If you remember Pulp Fiction, it's when Honey Bunny and Tim, what the hell is Tim's last name?
Rock.
What is it?
Rock.
Rock, thank you. I can't remember his actual name in the movie. And I won't spoil all the new movie for you too, the last half hour. So third parties are bad, right? So we know that they can provide all kinds of interesting things. By the way, people asked me if I was going to talk about Capital One. Not a third-party problem, pretty much an insider problem, right? But I do think they should change their tagline. You guys know the tagline, right? What's in your wallet? It should be, who's in your wallet? All right. Okay, everything's getting outsourced as questionnaires suck, and you can use external data to actually give you high confidence, observation-based signals so that you can make smart decisions about your vendors and yourself, right? So with that, I'm going to wrap it up and ask if you guys have any questions. Oh, usually this is where Chris Roberts says something good.
So where do you see your industry going next? What's going to be the next key indicator for technology that you're going to utilize?
So we get a lot of people who ask us about internal data. Like, can I actually take my own vulnerability scans and put them into the platform? So right now, that's part of it, and is to give people more visibility to their own internal systems, but also if they can export that back out so that other third parties that use them can see that data as well. The trick that we have is that you don't want people to be able to game the system. It has to be objective, right? It always has to be objective. So we're working with organizations to be able to take their own data so they can assess themselves, but we're not sure yet how much we can trust that data as part of their overall rating for external visibility, right? So I think that's part of it. The other one we're seeing is that a lot of people are looking at subsidiary management, right? So, and that might fit in with that same sort of vulnerability type of data. People talk about the dark web a lot, but the problem with the dark web is that dark web is kind of Yeah, they're just a bunch of assholes just putting stuff on the dark web, right? It's not high fidelity, it's not verifiable, it's not actionable. So we've done a few studies on dark web, and we don't think that's a good source of data. It's interesting as a point of reference, but it shouldn't contribute to the overall scoring, is the kind of the way we look at it.
What if you found a whole bunch of email addresses within some sort of data silo that was positioned on the dark web? Wouldn't that be a good indicator that?
Ashley Madison. So, yes and no. That's all I had to say, right? Okay. I'll tell you my Ashley Madison story. So, Ashley Madison. So the theory, when that whole thing broke, right, there was a lot of exposed credentials on the web, and people said that, well, Ashley Madison doesn't actually verify the email address, so they don't really care about the email address so much. It's just trusting. So I was curious about that. So I went and I told my wife, I go, look, honey, I'm going to go create an account on Ashley Madison. I just want you to know I'm just testing a theory here. I'm not actually going to be looking for love in all wrong places.
It's research.
And she said, well, I appreciate you coming to me, but you can just use my account. So you have to be careful, though. I said that at a conference, and somebody came up and they said, my marriage broke up as a consequence of Ashley Madison, so you never know. Yeah, be careful. So anyway, my point, though, is we actually do have exposed credentials. We provide them as an informational risk vector. The problem with it, though, is just what I said. You can't necessarily know whether they're accurate. And there was also that guy, from some security organization a few years ago who released 1.2 billion, 2 billion records on the internet. And it turns out he just compiled a bunch of stuff from a bunch of other tapes and just stuck them together so he would get notoriety, right? So yes, we provide it informationally, but it never calculates, we don't use it to calculate the overall score. So there's a lot of data out there, I completely agree with you. We're starting to pick up on Wi-Fi signal now too, by the way. So we're picking, I don't know if you guys know this, but there's a lot of apps that when you download them, there's actually an SDK that gets compiled into these apps, and they will figure out which Wi-Fi hotspot you're on, and they send it back to some site which collects it. So when you get onto a particular IP address, you got an app, you open it, it goes and reports back out and says, hey, I'm on Wi-Fi, Kathy's Wi-Fi hotspot, and it picks up the source IP address and it goes, hey, Kathy's Wi-Fi hotspot is at IP address 1.2.3.4. So there's so much data out there, and we're picking up on that kind of stuff, so we can determine where Wi-Fi signal's coming from. Part of the reason for doing that is so that we can figure out what's internally, what's guest Wi-Fi and what's corporate Wi-Fi, for example, to try to make the signal a little bit more higher fidelity. But yeah, if you know of some good data sources, pass it on, man, I'd love to know. We're also doing mobile application stuff too, by the way. We're pulling stuff off of App Store and Google Play Store, and we run it through things like it's not necessarily AppScan, but like AppScan or Fortified, and we then attribute it back to an organization by the domain that signed the certificate for that particular organization, and then we give them a rating on the mobile application development. So all kinds of interesting things to pull up out of there. Yeah?
What types of language needs to change in contracts that are made with third parties to account for services like BitSite and Risk Recon and Scorecard that present a score, and the score goes down by X%, requiring remediation of the vendor?
Yeah, so it's interesting. I've had conversations with a few customers, and some of them put language in there, and it's usually things like, first off, put them on notice that they will be monitored by a security rating system. Because then when you reach out to them, just to create an action plan, they can't say that they don't know. So it gives them the ability to go out and look at themselves. Like, for example, if you go out to our site or the Scorecard site, you can get your own risk rating for free. You can just look at it once a month or whatever it is and just sort of get it. So there's no reason why they shouldn't know what their score is in the first place. So that's number one, putting them on notice. We found that it's not particularly actionable to tell them that they will maintain a score of 740 or above. It doesn't constitute legal, what do they call it? Legal cause of action. Thank you. So you can't enforce that in the contract, but you can say that you want them to do that, right? The other thing that we see is compelling them to have a conversation with you about their score and to create an action plan, which should probably be in your vendor contract anyway. But basically you can say, if there are some findings, or we come to you and we say, we want you we want to have a conversation about increasing your encryption or whatever, that they're compelled to actually go along with that. So I actually have 4 standard contract clauses that if you stop by the booth real quick, I'll show them to you because I can't remember what they are right off the top of my head, but yeah. So those are the things, basically letting you know, compelling them to take action to work with you. Oh, and then one last thing, sorry. We've actually seen a big telecommunications provider who has sanctions in their contract that if the third party doesn't take action on their action plan and actually ameliorate their score, they actually start imposing financial penalties on them. And they've actually done that before. So, good question. Yeah.
So I have been on the receiving end as well as performed these third-party risk assessments. And historically, I've seen 2 approaches, right? When you're going against the big, say, Amazon or Microsoft, they're not even going to bother to keep their SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, right?
Yeah.
Or you're going to get, potentially, as you mentioned, an unqualified individual answering the questionnaire, which is lovely, and then they're going to pass with flying colors, right? So do you see the potential for bid side? Say I'm a bid side customer, for me to just provide that number to my, as a response, instead of, why bother with responding or answering the questionnaire? Simply, here's my score.
Yeah, so so there's a weird psychology. So there's 2 parts to your question, by the way. There's 2 answers. There's a weird psychology now when I talk to customers, I say, I counsel them that what you can do is, at least for tier 2 vendors, right? Tier 1 vendors, you might not want to just take the bid side score. They're too important to you. But at least with tier 2, tier 3, or whatever, if they've got a 750, which is a good score, they've got no botnet infections, no file sharing, no breaches, then just ask for a SOC 2 and move on with your life, right? It's fine. So you can actually go quickly through that. But when you say that to a lot of people, they're like, you'll take the questionnaires out of my cold, dead hands. They think that you just slapped their child when you tell them that. So I think that it'll start to evolve, and we're starting to see some customers, particularly large financials, who are starting to come around to that way of thinking, because there's just way too many assessments they have to do. And they understand that it's about risk management, it's not about risk avoidance, right? So I think it's going to evolve, and you can approach people and say, hey, will this suffice? And then you just kind of take whatever they come back with for an answer. What was the first part of your question? I lost myself there. Yeah, anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah, so it's about, there were 2 things, and I can't remember. I'll remember it later, and I'll just blurt it out. It doesn't matter.
SOC 1, SOC 2.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember. So whether or not people accept scores. Yeah, I was from the other side of the fence, and now I'm losing. If I remember, I'll seek you out. All right, so, yeah.
One more question. I mean, you've talked about the questionnaire. Has BitSite considered creating a standardized questionnaire that they can send to all of their customers or potential customers to augment the actual score that you have harvested?
So what you're talking about is, what do we call that? We call that not a catalog, but crap, there's a name for it, which is just escaping me right now. But there have been, so that was SIG's original intent, by the way. So the SIG actually wanted to do that, so you would fill it out once, upload it to SIG, and then anybody who wanted to do business with
Clearinghouse.
A clearinghouse, thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. So yeah, the problem is twofold. Number one is that people are reticent to put things up into a clearinghouse, but it's getting better. Again, I think security ratings are still at the beginning of, it's still where SIMs were back in the early 2000s, where people like, the SIM sucks. And now we're saying SIM sucks. A lot of people think that SIMs, you can't tune a SIM. But if you go see iSECURE, they will tune your SIM like nobody's business. Hum like a Tesla.
I'm asleep at the wheel.
So yeah, I think people are coming around to that at some point. The other side of the coin is that, and I said it before, which is that everybody thinks that they have a special requirement in their organization. So they take something like the SIG and they add about a 30% more worth of questions that it drives me crazy.
Came up with unified standards across a half a dozen different market verticals or silos, so that they, there's at least a standardized set that people can work from.
You have the idealism of a 20-year-old. I love it.
Thank you.
It's a great idea. I think in practice, people just need to get on board. I just think, because if you look at any questionnaire, it's always going to be the same framework categories. Look at ISO or NIST. I mean, by the way, we don't need both ISO and NIST. Anybody else? Let's argue about that. That'll be a great cocktail argument. But But it's the same thing, when you look at any of the questionnaires, they break down in the same areas, endpoint protection, security policy, physical security, blah, 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 And I think if you just ask those questions, there's a lot of redundancy in them. And if people finally come around to getting rid of the redundancy, your dream will be reality. That would be awesome. Yeah.
So just to comment on one of the problems with questionnaires is unless there's some sort of evidence-based checking on it, you're relying on the truthfulness of the person responding. Which is another reason why questionnaires really aren't a great solution. Unfortunately, as an industry, we're beholden to them because there's really nothing else save this that does that same thing.
Yeah.
I think getting to a point where the idea behind the SOC 2 Type 2, right? So that's an industry standard for the banking industry. Getting to that sort of a level where, as an information security organization, you can get a certification and move towards that certification. I think that's really the direction it needs to go. Something that is a validated report, something that has verifiable evidence-based answers to questions. That's, in conjunction with something like this, that's...
Yeah, so you're right. So I often think that, so I have this sort of image in my head. I was going to put it up here and I forgot to, anyway, I got things going on. But I think instead of asking the questionnaire first, and then you ask for things like the security policy and the SOC 2, and then there's data, right? I think it's completely the opposite. What you should do is take the database observations, and then anything that's good, don't ask those questions, ignore the security policy. We know that it's already there. Anything that's a gap, then you start looking at the security policy because that's what they're supposed to do internally, and then you don't ask the questions because you already know the answers about what they're supposed to do, and then whatever's left are things you send in questionnaires, right? So you use data first, you use attestation second, and then you use swear and vital third.
Validation.
Yeah. So I think that's how things should go in the long term, but people are, again, reticent to do that for the reasons that I talked about, is that by the way, if you said, we're going to use database observations instead of questionnaires, do you know how many people would be out of a job? There are so many people who, they are assessors, they go to work and they sit in that's what they do. They send out questionnaires, they look at them, they look at the security policies, and they just map them all together and they come up with an audit report, an assessment report. So I think that's part of the problem, is that people don't want, they don't want to lose their jobs. So, but yeah, if there is a perfect model, we're getting there. That's the good news. I think we just the industry needs to evolve a little bit. The same way, by the way, that self-driving is, do you guys hear that Tesla stock is going down because people think that that anybody's going to buy a self-driving car has already bought a self-driving car? Right? So that's why it's going down. The thing is that at some point people are going to get on board and then they're going to start going again. So I think you get that trough of disillusionment in Carter's model, and that's kind of where we are with the security rating systems industry. Same thing with Tesla. So I feel proud that the industry that I'm working in, which is now measuring stuff for a change, is being compared to Tesla. Not by the analyst, but by me. Yeah.
So I want to be a bedside customer, and I go to you and say, okay, I have these vendors or these clients. Do you have, what if they're not measured by you? Do you have a process in which they can then go forward?
Yeah, so remember I said we have this big ass database, the data lake, that goes back 8 years? So we got all the observations, so it's a new company, 2 guys in a garage, right, that haven't measured yet. As long as we can get their IP addresses, they've got a big enough footprint that we can actually profile them, we will get 8 years worth of data on their performance, or however far back it goes. So yeah, all we need to do is just say, you ask us, go look at Acme Corp, and we'll go map them out. It takes about 2 or 3 days, and then all the data is there going back for 8 years. That's pretty easy. Do it all the time. All right, I've gone way over time. So if you guys have any other questions, we're going to be out on the floor, and I'm going to be here all night. So if anybody wants to sit around and debate the merits of different cyber things or whatever, I'm here. So thanks so much.